Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. A quiet apartment block in Senegal outside Milan. Early morning light in a narrow corridor. A door that should open, doesn't. A phone that should ring, won't. For investigators, this isn't drama. It's a starting point. When a 29-year-old woman in her 7th month of pregnancy stops answering messages after a late Saturday, May 27, 2023, the clock matters more than anything else. Initial welfare checks confirm a simple set of facts. No forced entry. The interior is orderly to the point of artifice. Surfaces cleared, a faint chemical smell lingering. The device tied to the missing woman, Giulia Tramontano, shows no genuine activity after late evening on the 27th. Messages that appear later do not fully align with her known cadence or tone. Family statements are consistent. She was conscientious with appointments and prenatal care. This silence is abnormal. Those points move the case from routine concern to high-risk missing anchored to the apartment itself, the primary scene from the start. Investigators document what can be proven fast. Entry points, window latches, floor scuffs, a sink basin that appears recently scrubbed. None of this, standing alone, proves violence. Together, it shapes a narrow window. Something significant likely occurred between late Saturday and early Sunday. The apartment isn't treated as a backdrop. It is treated as evidence. Chain of custody begins there. Photographs, swabs, timestamps, and extends outward to elevators, stairwells, exterior cameras, and parking access. The working theory is intentionally conservative. Either Giulia left under her own power and was intercepted later, or the event of interest occurred in the home with subsequent efforts to obscure it. Data will decide which path holds. That means pulling network pings, scrubbing merchant logs from central Milan earlier that night, and comparing those to movement opportunities near Senegal after midnight. It also means mapping what is not present, calls that never went through, appointments missed without explanation, a routine that suddenly collapses. Giulia's profile is handled with care. Viewers don't need embellishment, they need context. She is a young professional, expecting a son, aligned to clinics and family habits that leave a predictable digital and real-world trail. People like that don't evaporate. When they go missing, the absence itself is a measurable anomaly. This first pass doesn't accuse anyone. It doesn't have to. The apartment asserts itself. Odor consistent with recent cleaning, order that feels engineered, and a phone that goes dark at the exact moment of pregnancy makes vanishing least plausible. From here, the case moves on two rails that will converge: interior forensics and external movements. If those lines meet, the story of the final hours will tighten around verifiable minutes. Giulia Tramontano was not a random disappearance. She was 29, in her 7th month of pregnancy, and her life left measurable trails: medical appointments on fixed dates, work obligations with predictable hours, family check-ins at regular intervals. Establishing that baseline is not background color, it is evidence. When investigators know what normal looks like, they can isolate where it breaks and when. The review begins with healthcare. Prenatal records confirm attendance, next visit reminders, and messaging from her clinic. No missed appointments in the weeks leading to the last weekend of May 2023. Pharmacy logs show routine purchases consistent with pregnancy care and nothing that indicates abrupt change in condition or behavior. That pattern supports one conclusion: Giulia was engaged with her care and planning for the birth. Employment records are next. Timesheets and supervisor confirmations show steady attendance. Commute windows align with her building's entry and exit camera time stamps from prior weeks. The pattern is consistent: leave, work, return, evening messages with family. No disciplinary notes, no extended absences, no warnings for unreliability. This is a stable adult with a routine that makes sense on paper and on video. Communications data is mapped without speculation. Family messages display a clear cadence: frequent, brief, responsive. Close friends report that she did not go silent overnight, that she answered even late evening texts with short updates. In the week before the incident, message content centers on normal scheduling, work, rest, medical planning, without any indication she intended to break contact. This is crucial. Planned vanishings create digital footprints of planning. They rarely leave nothing. Payment records are parsed. Card use shows small purchases tied to daily living, groceries, transit, and occasional city trips. No cash withdrawals suggesting a relocation, no bookings for travel, no rideshare charges out of pattern in the first half of that weekend. Bank activity stops aligning with her personal use at the same horizon where her device stops showing authentic activity. The stop point matters. It implies either loss of agency or external interference. Residence checks provide the domestic context without dramatization. Deliveries, neighbor statements regarding ordinary noise, and parcel logs from the prior week suggest normal home life. No reports of shouting or disturbances before the time frame already identified. If a crisis occurred, it did not announce itself in advance. It arrived in a narrow window and left traces that will be developed through forensic collection. Digital cadence is analyzed at the system level, not by tone. Investigators examine unlock events, app foreground times, and message send patterns. In the days leading up to Saturday, the unlock to send intervals track her usual behavior: short gaps, fast replies, clean handoffs between apps. After late evening on May 27th, that pattern collapses. Whatever messages follow do not fully match the device handling profile tied to her prior use. That difference will be addressed formally in a later chapter, but the baseline conclusion is firm. The phone behavior after the cutoff is anomalous. Routine mapping extends beyond screens. Julia's route preferences, documented by transit taps and location histories in prior weeks, favor simple, direct paths. She does not improvise late at night. Witness canvassing confirms she rarely left the building at odd hours without telling someone. These are verifiable habits, not character sketches. In towns like Senego, reliability is noticed. When a reliable person drops out of contact, that absence is its own red flag. The working stance remains conservative and impartial. Either she left with intention and deviated from every established habit at once, or an event inside the residence curtailed her ability to continue those habits. The second scenario is more consistent with the data so far, but the case will move at the pace of evidence. The data align too cleanly at the edges of the window, and sometimes that is the problem. Clean edges can hide the hand that shaped them. That is why the baseline must be airtight, so later insertions and staged actions cannot pass as genuine behavior. Human context is not ignored, it is kept proportional. Julia is presented to the audience as she is in the record, a young professional with a measurable routine, planning for a child, embedded in family communication, and responsible with her care. Viewers do not need speculation about feelings to understand significance. The numbers, appointments, unlock logs, transaction times say what needs to be said. This is not a person who simply walks away. From here, investigators will compare this established baseline to the Saturday timeline that stretches from central Milan back to Senego. When normal is documented with precision, any detour stands out. The next step is to test that detour. The baseline is set. Now the weekend window has to be tested against records that don't care about stories, tickets, timestamps, and cameras. The focus is Saturday, May 27, 2023, central Milan, then the return to Senego. Investigators start with what is fixed: merchant receipts, transit taps, and surveillance along a short corridor of downtown streets. The objective is narrow: identify who met Julia, when they separated, and how the movements funnel back to the apartment where the forensic collection began. A sequence emerges from routine sources. A contactless transit entry into the city earlier that day confirms arrival in the center. Purchase logs show small charges near a well-known venue in the evening hours. A camera across from a sidewalk entrance captures Julia approaching with a second woman. The images are clean enough to verify clothing and posture. They are not used to infer emotion. Both remain outside frame after entry. The purpose of that meeting is not speculated on here. Later witness statements will address it. For now, the value is time control. It locks the start of a conversation that matters to motive and to the clock. Inside the venue, investigators rely on transaction timestamps more than video. A pair of low-value receipts matches the window on camera. The names on the cards are consistent with known contacts. No alcohol total suggestive of extended intoxication. No booking or rideshare bills point to a change in plan. When they exit, another camera on the street confirms separation. Two women leave, acknowledge one another, then head in different directions. This is not a disappearance in the city. It is a movement path that returns to normal transit out of Milan. Return travel matters because it closes the freedom of action. Time bars from transit taps and vehicle plate reads on the route toward Senego show the window tightening to late evening. There is no evidence of an overnight detour to a hotel, a friend's apartment, or a second venue. The line is direct. By the time the corridor of cameras runs thin on the outskirts, the strongest data set becomes residential access points and the apartment's own forensic footprint. That is where the movement trail and the physical scene will have to match. Witness canvassing is used carefully and only where it can be cross-checked. Staff confirm the two-woman meeting without adding unverified comments about tone or conflict. A doorman remembers a short exchange at the exit that did not escalate beyond normal levels. Later, one of the two women provides materials that help explain the purpose of the meeting, but those details are held for the legal file until corroborated. What matters today is that none of these statements contradict the surveillance or the receipts. When human statements and hard timestamps align, investigators can rely on the timeline with confidence. The next question is whether anyone followed. Camera sweeps on streets leaving the venue identify no shadowing behavior that persists for more than a block or two. Transit patterns show ordinary density for a weekend night. Phone proximity analysis is cued for later chapters, but early checks do not show an obvious tail. The working assumption is that Giulia completed her city business and traveled back toward Senego using routine methods. The absence of anomalies in the city is not proof of safety, but it reduces the number of plausible points where third-party interference could have occurred before the apartment re-enters the frame. At this stage, the narrative discipline is simple. The city meeting defines motive pressure. The travel records define opportunity limits. Together, they funnel attention back to the residents. That does not point a finger in itself. It sets an investigative boundary. If the decisive event occurred outside, it would have to happen in a shrinking slice of time after departure from downtown, and before the period when the device tied to Giulia stops creating genuine events. If it occurred inside, the inward focus of receipts and cameras explains why exterior canvassing is not producing alternate routes or unexpected companions. One more step stands out. The short list of people whose communications intersect with Giulia's device on the 27th is compared to those who can be placed downtown and later near Senego. This is not a rumor exercise. It is a cross-reference of device presence, message timing, and known movement. The names on that list are not disclosed in this episode, but the cross-reference will support later interviews and the legal strategy. The method is standard: eliminate outsiders, narrow the circle, and test statements against the timeline now locked by independent systems. Audience value comes from clarity. Lives move through systems that record where and when. Those systems show a pregnant woman who confronts a difficult personal truth in the city, who separates without incident, and who returns toward home on schedule. She does not vanish in a plaza or alley. The risk corridor opens only when the route ends, and the door in Senego becomes the next fixed point on the map. That is where the investigation now needs to work harder than the person who tried to clean a surface and pass time off as chance. The return corridor out of Milan closes the window. What happens next depends on whether the residence in Senego yields proof of an indoor event or not. Scene processing starts as soon as the timeline is tight enough to justify a second pass with more intrusive techniques. The priority is simple: document what belongs, isolate what doesn't, and test every anomaly against the clock already established. Investigators re-enter with a structured plan. Entry points are photographed, then sealed. Floors are divided into grids. Alternate light sources sweep hard surfaces first, not to find drama, but to map cleaning patterns. What fluoresces evenly, what breaks off in arcs and white marks. A kitchen knife block shows a void, one slot without its blade. Inventory notes in earlier weeks had every piece present. That gap is not proof of violence on its own, but it becomes a marker. If a knife surfaces later in the process with transfer consistent with use, the slot explains its origin. Attention shifts to the bathroom. The tub has a sheen that isn't just soap residue. Swabs collect from the interior curve, the drain lip, and the overflow. The odor profile is not guessed at. It's logged and compared against common household solvents and alcohol-based liquids. On the side of the basin, a faint discoloration pattern suggests heat or an accelerant was present long enough to leave a trace but not long enough to char the surface. That distinction matters. Surface charring is obvious, evaporative signatures are not, and they are easy to miss without controlled light and collection. Luminol and phenolphthalein are used carefully. The aim is not to paint the room blue for the camera. It is to locate microscopic traces in seams and low-run areas that cleaning passes often miss. The lower hinge of the bathroom door responds first. Weak, irregular, but present. A baseboard seam responds second along a length that matches the width of a towel or cloth sweep. Those reactions do not explain a cause of death. They confirm that removal efforts targeted the very places people forget until testing reveals them. You can clean a surface. You can't clean a sequence. Here, the sequence begins to show. The drain trap is removed and sealed for lab work. What's recovered from traps in cases like this is not cinematic. It's usually hair, thread, and fine particulate that settle where water slows. Any biological material that binds to those particulates can anchor a timeline inside the home and connect to the autopsy later. No claims are made on scene. Chain of custody is everything. The same caution applies to the vacuum canister. Dust from the last pass is separated, bag fibers cataloged, and any micro debris consistent with a recent scrub, paper towel lint, degraded wipes, gets its own envelope. In the kitchen, counters read as too perfect. That alone is meaningless. Some people are tidy. The difference is in tool marks, linear streaks crossing perpendicular to the counter's usual wipe direction, a tell that a scrub was rushed and repeated. Under-cabinet kick plates often hold what the eye misses. Here, a trace response mirrors the bathroom baseboard, faint but aligned. The refrigerator handle is swabbed for touch DNA and tested later. Cleaners often forget handles because they don't look like surfaces, but contact there can preserve mixtures of skin cells that survive a general wipe-down. Footwear impressions are faint on tile, nearly invisible until side lighting throws micro-ridges into contrast. A partial outsole pattern repeats twice in the hallway, splitting toward the bathroom and kitchen. The stride length is short, the depth irregular, as if someone moved between rooms quickly under load or while carrying supplies. No size claim is made on scene. Outsole databases and lab overlays answer that later. The point is directionality. The tracks do not lead outward. They circulate inside, between the very rooms showing cleaning signatures. Garbage removal is a standard trap for the unprepared. Investigators check the building's refuse schedule and compare it to the last observed tenant disposal. If a bag went out just before the missing report, the dumpster pull is immediate. Bag-to-bag comparisons rely on brand, texture, and tear patterns where the roll separates. When matched, the bag from the apartment can be placed in a position in the dumpster that aligns with time. Then its neighbors are searched for companion wipes, cloths, or bottles. Finding an empty container with residual alcohol or a strong solvent does not end a case. It anchors a behavior, what was used, and when it was discarded. By late day, the apartment tells a consistent story, not a confession, not a theory, an evidence map. Cleaning happened. It focused on bathroom seams, lower surfaces, and high-touch areas. One knife is missing from a set. Movement patterns inside the unit favor a loop between kitchen and bath. Nothing indicates a forced removal by strangers. Nothing suggests a spontaneous walkout. If the decisive act happened here, the subsequent hours were spent not in panic, but in attempted control. Wash, wipe, bag, and move on. This is where the indoor scene intersects the outer search logic. Attempted control inside usually pairs with disposal attempts outside. That doesn't get ahead of the story, it sets the next move. Exterior canvassing must prioritize locations consistent with quick access from the residents and privacy enough to continue the same pattern. Apply heat, conceal, return. Grid assignments are updated, and the radius is drawn around garages, service lanes, and green strips that can hide the next layer of evidence. It's important to hold one line of respect throughout. Julia Tramontano is not a narrative device. She is the person for whom this precision exists. Cases like this are built in hours and minutes because people deserve answers with the same accuracy that planned their lives. In towns like Senegal, a quiet block depends on that trust. Evidence turns shock into clarity. Clarity is how communities hold together after the worst things happen. When the indoor pattern reads wash wipe control, the next logical step is outside. Close enough for speed, hidden enough for continuity. The grid begins at the building's garages and pushes into the narrow green strip beyond. This isn't guesswork. It's the shortest set of places where someone could extend the same behavior without being seen from the street. Teams walk a box pattern from concrete to grass. They're not looking for spectacle. They're looking for small contradictions. Soil that doesn't match the season. Plastic that shouldn't be brittle. Patches that smell wrong in open air. Two areas stand out. The first is a shallow ellipse near the back of the garages, soil crusted and friable. The second sits 10 meters deeper into cover, a darker patch with faint, uneven singe on low vegetation. Both sites are photographed, gridded, and cored. The purpose is simple: prove whether heat and accelerant were applied recently and whether trace transfer connects to what was collected in the apartment. Preliminary field tests indicate residues consistent with petroleum distillates on the darker patch. It's not a lab result, it's an indicator that justifies priority handling. Nearby, small heat-deformed polymer flakes are recovered, likely from consumer bags or liners that softened rather than burned through. That matters because it matches a control-heavy method: containment, ignition, reassess. Not a brush fire, not random trash burning. The pattern is too contained for that. Perimeter canvassing checks who had eyes on the backside of the garages over the weekend. The answers are unglamorous but useful. Brief passers-by, no one lingering. Exterior cameras on the street don't see these angles. That's expected. What they do give is timing. Who moved vehicles in and out that night, which exit lanes were used, and when movement ceased. Those stamps are pulled and held next to the indoor timeline. The window tightens again. Soil cores and swabs go out under chain of custody. If lab work later confirms a match between outdoor residues and the apartment's bathroom collection, alcohol traces inside, petroleum outside, the two scenes will become one sequence. That's the evidentiary value here, not a theory about intent, but a mechanical linkage between washdown and attempted destruction. The job is to prove that linkage with enough precision that no later statement can rewrite the order of events. Searchers do not chase every scrap. They prioritize what fits the method already observed. In the buffer between the two scorched sites, a small cluster of ash-coated particulates is screened through gauze. Fine char, paper filaments, and one fragment with a feathery edge typical of disposable wipes. It's bagged, labeled, and moved. Whether it carries anything biological is for the lab. Out here, the question is simpler. Was heat applied more than once? The spacing suggests it was, and that the person adjusted position to reduce visibility from the garages. There's a human frame that has to stay present without taking over. People who live along this strip have to walk their routines with the knowledge that something was done here to erase a person's presence. Communities can handle bad news. What they can't handle is confusion. That's why the search report reads like a ledger. Coordinates, depths, volumes, timestamps, so the public story doesn't fracture later. By end of day, the exterior phase mirrors the apartment. Controlled activity, not panic. Heat signatures, accelerant indicators, and containment debris point to an effort to change evidence rather than flee from it. The next move is inevitable. Expand coverage along the same line of concealment, keep the corridor tight, and prepare for recovery operations if the pattern holds. With the exterior search pointing to controlled disposal attempts, the next pressure point is digital. If the apartment is the interior anchor and the green strip is the exterior extension, the phone is the thread that should run cleanly through both, unless someone tried to reroute it. Examiners pull a full extraction under warrant. System logs, unlock events, Wi-Fi associations, cell tower handshakes, message metadata, and app tokens. The question is narrow. Did the device behave like Giulia Tramontano after late evening May 27, 2023, or did it only look that way on the surface? Baseline metrics from prior weeks establish her typical handling: short screen-on bursts, rapid unlock-to-send intervals, predictable late-evening replies, and a steady swipe typing speed. After the return corridor closes that Saturday night, the pattern shifts. Unlock sessions become longer before messages go out. Typing cadence slows, and punctuation changes. Autocorrect entries that normally appear in her threads don't populate the way they did earlier in the week. It's still her handset, but the behavior profile diverges from the person who used it all month. Network artifacts tighten the window further. The handset reassociates with the apartment's Wi-Fi right after the downtown meetup, then remains anchored there during a period when outgoing messages suggest mobility. A later text implies she's out, but the phone's DHCP lease renewal and signal strength say otherwise. This is not conjecture. It's routine router logging matched to the device's MAC address. If a message claims movement, the infrastructure says home. That split matters because it separates what was typed from where the phone actually was. Battery telemetry adds another layer. Her normal usage leaves the phone on charge around midnight for short top-ups. On the night in question, the device shows a longer charge session beginning later than usual, then an abrupt unplug during the same window. That exterior movement is likely. The charging source hash matches the apartment outlet used in prior days. In cases like this, the story is in the overlaps: a text purporting to be on the move, a phone tied to the home network, and a battery pattern that never left the wall. Messaging integrity is tested the same way examiners validate spoof claims in other cases. Compare keyboard language packs, emoji frequency, and the transition time between composing and sending. The post-cutoff texts display different choices: full words where she used abbreviations, periods where she often left a clean line, and zero of the shorthand tied to her chats that week. Even the error pattern shifts. The corrections take longer, and the backspace to character ratio increases. People type like themselves. When they don't, you measure it. Location traces on the carrier side are conservative but helpful. The phone does not ping far from the residence during the period when messages create the impression of travel. Later, a short movement aligns with the corridor behind the garages. There is no chase sequence here, no dramatic tail, just incremental alignment between cell activity, brief handset relocation, and the scorched points already logged outside. It closes space for any narrative where the device wandered independently while the user vanished. Finally, notification behavior undercuts spontaneity claims. When Julia handled the phone, she typically previewed notifications before replying, toggling in and out of apps in short bursts. The night in question shows straight-line behavior: unlock, open one thread, send, lock, no preview, no skim. That's the difference between someone conversing and someone administering a script. In towns like Sanago, murders aren't just crimes. They disrupt routines the phone can't help but record. This digital sequence doesn't prove cause of death. It doesn't need to. It establishes that after late May 27th, the handset's body was present, but its voice was altered. Paired with the apartment's cleaning signatures and the exterior accelerant indicators, the device evidence completes the third side of the triangle. Inside, outside, and online now point in the same direction. The next step is recovery and autopsy, clinical, necessary, and tied to the same clock. Search operations expand along the same corridor behind the garages. The plan is tight: re-walk the scorch line, probe the cover where heat signatures clustered, and work outward by meters, not leaps. Late on May 31st and into the early hours of June 1st, 2023, recovery personnel locate human remains in the green area adjacent to the parking structures in Sanago. The scene is secured in minutes. Photographs, grids, and evidence flags go down in sequence before anything is moved. This is the point where a missing person file ends and a homicide file stands on its own. Chain of custody is not a phrase for forms. It is the spine of a case. The remains are documented as found, bagged with environmental controls, and transported under escort. Adjacent soil, plant matter with singe, and fragments consistent with heat-deformed consumer plastics are collected as companion evidence. A metal cutting implement recovered nearby, consistent with a kitchen knife profile, is packaged separately for later DNA and toolmark analysis. No conclusions are read on scene. The work now belongs to pathology. At the autopsy suite, identification is confirmed through a combination of distinguishing features and DNA comparison with family references. Pregnancy is verified. The exam is clinical and exhaustive. The report documents approximately 37 stab wounds, with 2 characterized as fatal due to vascular injury consistent with rapid exsanguination. Wound mapping notes distribution and depth. Angles are recorded to evaluate potential handedness, though that inference will be handled cautiously at trial. Defensive injury markers are reviewed. The fetus is examined separately, with findings recorded to support the additional charge under Italian law for non-consensual termination of pregnancy. Toxicology samples are drawn from all appropriate matrices. In cases with suspected pre-incident poisoning, later lab work will look for rodenticide compounds. Those results enter the file in a different phase, but the samples are taken now to preserve the option. Trace evidence, fibers, any residual particulates consistent with cleaning products, is collected from hair and undernail scrapings. The objective is not narrative. It is to create a matrix that can be cross-referenced against what the apartment and the exterior grid already told us. Post-mortem interval is estimated using standard parameters for the environment and the condition of the remains. While exact timing is always a range, the autopsy constraints fit the investigative window established by the late May 27th cutoff and the days that followed. That alignment matters. When timelines from pathology and digital forensics agree, the room for counter-stories narrows. Back at evidence control, the suspected knife is logged for biological swabbing, latent prints, and microscopic toolmark comparison. If the profile fits the missing slot from the apartment's block and returns a mixture consistent with the victim, it will anchor the indoor scene to the recovered weapon. Even without that match, the cause of death and the manner are settled here. Homicide by multiple sharp force injuries. The case no longer relies on implication. The body, the wounds, and the recovery location answer what happened. This is where the human component belongs, in the dignity of procedures that keep a person from being reduced to rumor. Families deserve precision. Communities deserve clarity. Evidence delivers both. The next step is to integrate pathology with intent indicators, prior searches, alleged poisoning attempts, and staged communications. That is how a motive moves from suspicion to proof. The case closes on evidence, not conjecture. By the time the file reached court in Milan, 3 lines were already welded together: the apartment in Senego as the primary indoor scene with targeted cleanup, the green strip by the garages as the disposal corridor with controlled burn attempts, and the phone that stayed home while messages pretended it didn't. Recovery on May 31st, June 1st, 2023, and autopsy findings: approximately 37 stab wounds, 2 fatal, fixed manner and timing. Pregnancy was confirmed. From there, intent was clarified by pre-incident rodenticide research and post-incident staging. In plain terms, plan, act, conceal. In Milan's Assize Court on November 25, 2024, the judgment was life imprisonment for Alessandro Impagnatiello, with aggravating factors of cruelty, unlawful termination of pregnancy, and concealment of a body. On June 25, 2025, the appeals panel confirmed the life sentence. They excluded the formal premeditation aggravator but left the rest intact. The sentence did not change. There is no alternate ending to debate. The record speaks once. A few things matter beyond the verdict. First, staged communications are detectable when you measure device handling, network ties, and timing against a person's real habits. Second, cleanup patterns and controlled burn sites form a sequence that can't be argued away when indoor and outdoor traces match. Third, dignity is built into procedure: careful recovery, complete autopsy, clean chain of custody. That's how a community gets clarity instead of rumor. Giulia Tramontano, 29 and 7 months pregnant, is not reduced to a headline here. She is the reason the timeline was sharpened to minutes and the reason the work was methodical. Justice doesn't repair loss, but it sets a boundary the living must honor. If you see escalating control, if messages start to feel staged in your own life, use your local emergency number or a domestic violence hotline. Quiet help can interrupt a pattern before it becomes a timeline. This series held one spine from start to finish: apartment, device, field, recovery, intent, judgment. One victim, one offender, one jurisdiction, Senego/Milan, Italy, and one outcome: life confirmed. The darkest truths here weren't imagined, they were proven. I've walked you through this case not to scare you, but to sharpen choices. Evidence showed control, staging, and harm hidden at home. In the U.S., safety often starts small. Answer the call, keep the receipts, trust your routine. If a message feels scripted, say something and get help. Quiet help still counts. What did this teach you about spotting risk? Do you agree with the court's outcome? Tell me where you're watching from. If this resonated, or if it didn't, say why. Share this with someone who might need it, and if you want more clear human true crime reporting, hit subscribe and turn on notifications.